All right, well, welcome everybody to the FTC GLBA Safeguard Rules for Dealerships update. My name is John Acosta. I'm the CEO of VTech Dealer IT. Today we have Stefan Heath he is the CTO for Torchlight, our cybersecurity partners. I'm really excited to have this conversation today. A little bit about Stefan. He has about 20 years of experience, right? Is that correct, Stefan? About
Yeah,
20 years of experience
right.
in the cybersecurity space. Yep, you've done everything in everything in the cybersecurity space. Ethical hacker, CISO, large quantity of certifications, including CISSP, CISA, CISM, OSCP, the acronym alphabet here on your qualifications. Also, you hold a master's degree in computer science from the University of Eastern Washington, and also you served as an adjunct lecturer for information technology. So I'm really excited about presenting for our dealer customers and vendors as well. Having this conversation from your perspective, looking at GLBA from the perspective of a technical guy. So I think it's going to be pretty fun. So a little bit about GLBA, just to give everybody a 30,000 foot view. So GLBA was originally enacted in 1999. So it's nothing that's relatively new, but in October 27th of 2021, and they talked about this for a couple of years, is they updated their safeguard rules for financial institutions to include car dealerships, right? They specifically name motor vehicle dealers in their new act, and they have about a year to be able to be compliant, right? From now until December, or January until December, to be able to be compliant on this ruling. And there's some pretty hefty fines that come with that. So we'll leave that up to the dealers to decide what their risk factor is and talk to their in-house counsel about what that looks like. But today on this call, we're going to go over kind of broad strokes about what things mean. And from your perspective, Stefan, and from our perspective, from the dealership perspective, we'll bring it and hopefully educate and bring some light to this deep, dark, scary hole of compliance. All right, so a little bit of at the end, we'll take some questions. If anybody wants to, do questions, we'll do a little bit of a Q&A, and we'll have some more information about how to download this this presentation and get a hold of us. If you have to ask any of those questions, we'll be happy to answer that. So the first on the item list is we need to dealerships now have to have an information security program, right? So this is basically the constitutional document of what the dealership should look like, right? Or what steps the dealership should have, and how they manage that from a 3-inch binder perspective, for lack of a better term, like your security or safety program for OSHA, like your red flag program, whatever that looks like, a 3-inch binder. Can you, kind of elaborate a little bit of what the bones of an information security program should look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just the general rules of how you're going to go about getting to, a safer spot than you are today. Basically, it's just your rules and your guidelines that you put in place to do that. And one of the elements that they have in here is that they want you to give a written report to the board and do that. And one of the critical linkages that I think is important here is that when you create the information security program and you get your board of directors or your senior officers to buy off on, yeah, this is what we want to do, it gives a good communication document to your IT staff or to your working staff of, these are the expectations, this is what we as an organization are going to do to try and protect our data and the customer data.
Yeah, and the the beauty of it is that it doesn't only include your cybersecurity, right?
What are you doing?
It can include your information security program from a data perspective as well. I think somebody's hot mic'd over here. So that's from a data perspective. You want to make sure that records as well are part of that, and that you're addressing every aspect of the dealership, not only from an IT perspective, right? That you're looking at your information security program from a comprehensive view, including that's physical documentation as well. You want to make sure that all those things are included in that incident or that information security program, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You want to look at things from, your physical perspective, from a technology perspective, just from a from an administrative perspective, even of, how are you going to handle data? What are your procedures? Those sorts of things. I mean, it really does hit all layers of the organization in any way that you handle data.
Okay. All right. So next on the list is incident response plan. This is a measurable, repeatable game plan or, playbook for when something happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your general sales manager calls up and he says, hey, I got a phishing email and I sent email requesting personal identifiable information to everybody in our database. What do you do? And this is that, red phone book, right? The red phone where you call and say, let's activate this game plan.
Yeah, and the incident response plan is really critical, because in those bad moments, you suddenly, you're going to do your work and everything's ransomware, or any other nightmare scenario that none of us want to imagine. When you create the plan and okay, this is this person's role, or you've even written out, here's our press release, of what we're going to have, or here might be our notification to our customers. It's already been pre-reviewed by legal that we have that. Or, better yet, it's okay, IT knows exactly where our backups are. They're isolated from everything. We know the process to restore everything. We can get right to work on it. If you can contain that panic, it usually takes it takes an already stressful day and it makes it a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
For sure. And
yeah.
More importantly than that, we have seen that, and there have been studies as well that have really backed this up, is that folks who don't have the plan end up spending probably almost twice as much in the cleanup and the response, because they're going to overspend, they're going to spend in the wrong directions, they're going to panic and just start throwing things at the wall, and your response, it's not a scenario that anyone wants to get into, but nobody's bulletproof. Nobody's going to completely avoid this forever, no matter how good controls are. It's all about reducing risk. So, having that in place for, okay, something bad happens, but we know the path to recovery. We know how to get things back up. It can take, something where somebody might be out for 2 weeks and crunch it down to, well, you're out for an afternoon.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and that the biggest piece is have somebody that's responsible for it, right? There'll be somebody that's the incident manager that makes sure that everybody's playing from the same sheet of music, and then those remediation steps along the way. Make sure that you inform all the stakeholders, get legal involved, like just something that's measurable, repeatable, and that you have top of mind in some capacity in case this is the break in case of emergency, case,
and
right?
Practice it.
Yes,
Practice it at a tabletop.
Yeah. So anybody that has, background in the military or first responders will understand these things. Take a note from them that these are incident response plans are just, binders with a plan, and you make it happen on a regular basis. So, just practice that and make sure that it's top of mind. So also periodic written risk assessment. This is when an external company or comes in and says, here's where your strengths, here's your weaknesses are. This is what your risk looks like. Just start measuring that risk. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, so the risk assessment really is, it's going to be the document that really guides your information security program. It's going to guide how you spend your money and what you fix, and even what risks you choose. Okay, we're going to accept this risk as just a risk of doing business. It really is the way that you're going to, the process looks like you take and you look at, okay, what are all the areas that were exposed? What are all the areas where we have a threat? And then what are we doing? And it just is a process where you list out all the bad things that can happen, and here are all the good things we're doing to try and prevent this thing from happening. And then you usually have an expert come in and work you through the process, and then give their opinion of, this is the level of risk that you're still exposed to at this particular point. So go down the list, and then you can say, hey, look, we're really exposed at this particular point. This is something where we really ought to shore up. It gives a document to really help guide the program and where you make your investments and what areas of vulnerability you choose to correct.
Yeah, and the thought that usually comes up with compliance is a marathon, and where do you want to be, mile 1 or mile 20 of that marathon, right? And
Yeah.
I think having an information security program, an incident response plan, and a risk assessment how many miles of that marathon would you say would be covered by having those kind of three things covered?
I mean, that covers, it's not the be all end all, but it is the start. It's going to
Yeah.
tell you how to get to that mile 20. When you finish up that particular exercise, that's really what you're looking for, is understanding the route and everything. It's like, you don't want to be wandering out in the backcountry without a map. You
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
have,
exactly.
you,
Exactly.
you want to have something where you understand, your risks, you understand your roadmap. And more importantly, and I really want to point this out to folks, is that, the days are gone and forgotten where you can just say, I didn't know, and shrug your shoulders when something bad happens, when like the regulators come in. I mean, quite frankly, GLBA, I mean, there have been folks in higher ed and banking and all of them dealing with it, as you said, since 99. So the regulators, they're not really going to want to hear, oh, we just didn't know.
Yeah.
That's not an answer. The usually the response to, oh, we didn't know, is, well, here's your fine. That's
Yeah.
it's if you are in a position where you understand your risk, you have a plan to fix it, you're working on it, you've got a roadmap, and that's what your program and your risk assessment and these sort of things build, that roadmap of how you're going to get there. If you're in a situation where a bad thing happens and you're dealing with a regulator and you just are like, yeah, well, here was our plan, this is what we were working on, we had gotten these things done, we hadn't gotten to this thing, we understand exactly what happened and why, we're already working to address it, you're in a much better place from the position of an examiner of, and that's from my experience. It's always, they're always willing to cut a little bit of slack to the folks who are really working on it and everything. I mean, obviously that's not a promise, I can't control them, but
Yeah.
that's what I've seen historically.
Yeah, and the scenario is, if the guys in suits walk into your organization and you give them that 3-inch binder and say, hey, this is all of our information, here it is, ready for you to look at, rather than somebody walking in and saying, oh, what is an information security, what's an information security program, what is an incident response plan, what's a risk assessment. You're in way better shape if, just showing everybody, being prepared for that type of deep look into your organization. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's a big point. What scenario you want to be in, A or B? I would prefer to be in scenario A, where I'm ready for whatever that looks like. All right. So encrypting data in transit over external networks and at rest. So that means everything data that has personal identifiable information, that is, and the FTC broadly defines what personal identifiable information is, correct? That's a name, an email, an address, not just social security numbers, just like, oh no, we don't have anybody's social security numbers. No. That's somebody's, just information that's in a CRM is considered to be PII. So anything that's in that world, just make sure that your vendors are encrypting that data. If you're doing any backups, that those backups are encrypted and that you can show that they're actually encrypted, that you're using any programs like Citrix ShareFile, OneDrive, Google G Suite, that those are, some of them have native encryptions, and making sure that those things are enabled and that you're confirming those things. When transmitting data from the firewall for the network, that you have encryption available on those things as well. So that's a big one that's kind of deep into the weeds, that you probably need a technical expert to be able to do something like that, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. But the part of it that anyone who's well connected within the organization can do is to really identify all those methods in which data is transmitted. Like, how do we interact with our customers? How do we interact with their data? Understanding that and putting that all in a list is going to be significantly better overall to just being able to have the conversation with the technical folks of being able to figure it out. What vendor, what's our CRM vendor? Okay, we need to talk to them. What are some internal processes that we have for handling things? I mean, are things just, stored, insecurely? Are they just, are they, just on a file share and we've never even checked to see if it's encrypted? Or, any number of things like this is where you can get in trouble. So it really is, I always love to talk about how, security is there to protect the business. I mean, we're not security people are not in the business of doing security for the sake of security. It's always about supporting that business structure and being able to do that. So the better you as an organization can understand your business structure and how you do business, becomes massively easier to secure it, because we can have a conversation. It's not dealing in hypotheticals.
So Stefan, just to be clear, your job isn't to make people's lives harder and more difficult to do their jobs.
No, absolutely not. You know what?
Right?
If the greatest wins that I ever found is that if I can come into an organization and I can say, hey, look at this, I can make it easier for you and more secure.
Yeah.
That's the days I always go home happy. That's what I always look for. And it's my number one goal every time, is to support that business. Because I mean, we're not, there's no point to it otherwise. There's no need for security if there's no business.
Absolutely. Well, on that point, one thing that is cumbersome and does make everybody's lives a little bit more difficult, but way more secure, is multi-factor authentication. Somebody asked me the other day, is like, what were the, Tim Cox from Carnow, what we were doing a podcast, and he was asking me, what are the top 3 security things that you would do? And top 3 is multi-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, multi-factor authentication, right? Mm-hmm. Like you said many times, the risk reduction of MFA is massive. Can you explain to people just a little bit in layman's terms what MFA is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it's something that we're probably all familiar with at this point. It's that the concept is that when you're going to log into something, we always have done the username and password, but then, which is, not to get too much in the weeds of, information security theory, but that's something, that's something that, only you are supposed to know. So that proves, hey, I'm this person. But then we're going to add an additional factor, which is where the phrase multi-factor comes from, is that we want to say, okay, well, it's something you have. So it's, my cell phone here. And I might get a text message, or I might get a push notification on it. It might be something other than a cell phone, but for most folks, that's what it's going to be. And it gives a second way of proving that you are who you say you are. And the reason it's important is that if, let's say somebody clicks a phishing email and they put in their password, bad guy gets the password. If you don't have multi-factor, then in theory, they're in a position where they could connect to your VPN, they could connect to, your Office 365, .com kind of site, and they could just log in because they have everything they need. They have the username, they have the password, they just log in. And then they have full access to everything, and then things get worse from there. Now, multi-factor, the idea is, okay, well, somebody gets your username and password, and then wait, they don't also have your phone. And so if they try to log in, the person who is the real person is going to get a notice on their phone that says, hey, are you trying to log in from Israel or the Ukraine or wherever else? And you say no, and you've knocked that particular person out, and it's time to go change your password. So it's having that extra layer. I can't tell you how much more secure that's going to make you, because everyone at some point is going to click a phishing email. Yeah. I have done it. Okay. I've been in security for 20 years. I mean, I had a situation where working with a dealer or working with a vendor, and they were, I was expecting an invoice from them. Suddenly I got an invoice from them. Hey, isn't that great? Well, a bad guy had taken over their email and sent out a fake invoice to me. Oof. But, it's like, so what, but here's the thing. Let's circle back to the incident response plan. I realized 2 seconds after I clicked it, I realized exactly what happened. We activated our incident response plan. I called the SOC. They had everything blocked and everything. We nuked my phone, completely redid it. It was done in 15 minutes, and there was no data exposed whatsoever. But again, also multi-factor involved. They didn't get a password or anything, but if they did, that's, again, another layer, another warning that you have in that case.
Yeah. And multi-factor, like trying to cheat this problem, right, or getting into people's email, it's how majority of phishing emails happen, and a large portion of cybersecurity incidents happen through this methodology. That's why multi-factor authentication is such an important key piece. And if your controller, it's Saturday morning and she's waiting for a wire or whatever that looks like, and she's, at home looking through her email, and then she just happens to, or he just happens to click on that, and suddenly they come in on Monday, and the proverbial S has hit the fan, That's what we're trying to prevent, right? Is from somebody when just on a bad moment, or they're, dealing with their kids at home or working from home or whatever that looks like, just has a lapse in judgment for a split second. That's all it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is just to the comment of it making life a little bit more difficult. The more modern multi-factor authentication programs, they're not going to check. They're not going to force you, if you're coming from the same device or the same IP, they're not going to check you every time. They might check you once a month because they have a smarter thing, that they're working on behind it. I mean, I've seen vendors that have like an adaptive one. If they take all of your behavior and roll it into a risk, of saying, okay, well, this person logs in from, I'm in Spokane, Washington. So I log in from Spokane, Washington over and over again. And then suddenly I log in from Georgia. Yeah. Now I might've been on a plane and visiting somebody down there, and that's fine. I can click it again and verify that I am who I am, but there really is an ability to make it smarter and make it less invasive to people's life and their workflow.
Yeah. All right. So data retention policy, this is something that's, I've done a lot of buy sells in the car business, and you suddenly buy a dealership that's been around for forever, right? It's been around for 100 years. And suddenly you walk into a room and there's, 400 boxes of old ROs that have been around for 20 years that, like somebody said, it was great kind of analogy is to look at data like toxic waste. Is you have to be very careful with it. And like personal identifiable information like toxic waste is you have to be careful with it. And if it doesn't serve a purpose, or you do not have to comply with state or federal law, right? Always check your local legislation for those things, get rid of it, right? Is dispose of it, shred it, get rid of it as appropriately as possible, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, storing it is going to cost you money that you don't need to spend, because you don't need it. It's, it's the hoarder house, you don't need all that documents lying around, and it's a risk. It's a risk to you of, having that data. It's not something that, I mean, you don't want to have to disclose to somebody you haven't done business with in 10 years just because you had an incident. I mean, that's certainly not. And, playing the, I'm not a lawyer card, but I can tell you that just about every lawyer I've ever talked to has said, man, you don't want it. I mean, you end up in a lawsuit that's more discovery that people have. And it's toxic waste is the perfect analogy. I mean, you just don't want it. Create a policy, get rid of stuff you don't need.
Absolutely. All right. So change management, this is something near and dear to my heart. Dealerships do a lot of change, and they give access to a lot of vendors, and sometimes the dealer principal doesn't know about it. GSM signs up for something, or general manager. It's, change management. Can you speak about change management, how that procedure holds up in adopting certain things for dealerships?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the dealer world, what you don't want is you don't want people making changes that you don't know about. That's the core. And it doesn't matter who that is. It doesn't matter if it's somebody in accounting, or if it's your IT provider, or anyone else. You want to have an organization because you want to understand. Remember, you've done the risk assessment. You understand your organization as it stands. Changes could modify what your risk is. So you want to just have a process, and it doesn't have to be cumbersome. It's just a method of, okay, let's document, this is the change that we want. This is who's approving it. This is why we're doing it. This is our plan if it doesn't work. Just, some basic, just a thought exercise that can save you a lot of trouble in the long run. And most importantly, if, it can help just from the IT perspective of suddenly something's broken. It gives you a spot to go back of, this started acting weird like a month ago. Okay, you go back a month ago. Oh wait, we made this change. I wonder if they're related. It really helps, and it helps quantify that risk, and make sure that you're keeping in front of any changes that you're making.
And also the 180 of that is to make sure that you're, if vendors have hooks into your organization, that you're shutting those things off after you're no longer doing business with them. You can't imagine how many dealerships that I've walked into that, people had access from 20, 15 years ago that used to be, they've been on CDK forever, or they've been on rentals, and they had to do with data pulls, and they no longer need that, or whatever that looks like, to make sure that we're shutting those doors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That even points back to what I said earlier. Know how the data is going.
Yeah, exactly.
If you know that and you have that document, it makes it a lot easier to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Also, appoint a single qualified individual. That can be somebody in-house that has credentials like your credentials, or that can be outsourced through a partner like our companies that are doing these things that say, hey, I can oversee this ISP. I'm qualified to understand what the heck we're talking about in some capacity, and they can put all the pieces together. What would you say that kind of the minimum qualifications of people that could oversee that ISP would be?
Well, I mean, they obviously they need to be familiar with the regulation to begin with. I mean, to understand,
Yeah.
okay, this is what GLBA wants us to do, and this is what it means. And I think beyond that, it's having some level of training or understanding within security. Obviously, it depends a lot on the size of the organization. A very small organization, it's going to be harder to get or to afford somebody that has a massive line of credentials. But even if you've got somebody who's understands IT and then understands security on top of it, they've taken a little bit of training in GLBA, they can put it together. That's helpful. But it's also important that it's somebody who has some level of authority. This isn't going to be somebody you want to designate down to the bottom,
Yeah.
because you want this to be somebody who's going to be able to go to the owner's ear and say, hey, look, we've got a problem, people aren't following this, and actually have some level of enforcement to it.
Yeah, and also listen to your qualified individual, right? It's like he can tell you until they're blue, or she can tell you until they're blue in their face about what needs to happen. And if they don't necessarily have the pull, trust, or clout in the industry, it's just having somebody that it's just not going to really do you a lot of good, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So monitor and log the activity of authorized users and detect unauthorized access to customer information. So this is big. This is what the Security Operations Center does for us on a regular basis, is looking 24/7, 365, New Year's Day, Thanksgiving Day. When we're sleeping, I like to say that you guys are the warm and fuzzy blanket that keeps us safe at night. I know that there's qualified individuals that are led by guys like you at Torchlight that are making sure that if the dealership usually speaks to a 300-mile radius around the dealership, that if it's suddenly talking to Uzbekistan, or there's large data uploads or whatever that looks like, that's completely out of the norm, those things are cut off, they're investigated. And the beauty with Torchlight is that you guys first take action and then let us know what's going on, which is, in my book, the really the best way to do it, because we can say, oh, no, that looks like normal activity. It's the trust but verify. It's cut it off at the kind of genesis, the point of genesis, and then we deal with it and say, oh, no, that's something that is allowed because there's a phone guy that lives in the Czech Republic that's on vacation, that's doing some things. And
right.
it looks kind of odd, but you guys cut that off and then give access, which is a really, really good benefit.
Yeah, it is. And the illustration I always like to use is that, having good monitoring, understanding what's going on in your network, and being able to see things that are out of the ordinary, it takes that time of when something bad happens or somebody makes a mistake. It can take that, it can take something from, oh God, we got to activate our incident response plan, we got to go through all these things, we got to do all this recovery, we got to do all this work, all the way down to, hey, we caught something, we cut it off, it's over. That's incredibly powerful. And more importantly, you hear all the time about breaches in which they were in the organization for 90 days and nobody detected it. I mean, these are situations you get into when the monitoring and logging and things aren't really happening. And the important word of those two is monitor, because I've seen plenty of organizations that will buy a widget and they'll stick it on the shelf and all their logs are going to it. Nobody's looking at it, nobody's tuning it, nobody's understanding what normal looks like and what abnormal looks like. And I mean, it's a handy tool for the forensic guys who come in and try and piece together what bad thing happened to you when everything's locked down. But it really is about that monitoring and that response.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of like the endpoint detection and response, is that something's actually happening. You're not going to the dentist and saying, oh yeah, you need a root canal and you have a couple cavities. It's while you were sleeping, you had, we identified a big problem, we dealt with it, and you woke up a little bit sore, and you got to find like a report of what happened, said, okay, well, we can move forward with our daily business. So that's a big piece. So moving on a little bit, penetration test and vulnerability test. That, can you talk a little bit about that? What does that look like on the cyber side? What does it look like on the physical side? You know, is that guy showing up with pizza boxes and a fake mustache and trying to get into your server room, or what does that look like?
Well, it can look like a lot of different things, but at its core, it really is. It's about hiring somebody who knows how to break into stuff to try and break into you. I mean, is really what it boils down to. And so from the cybersecurity side, you're dealing with an ethical hacker, somebody who uses the same tools and techniques that the bad guys, somebody who's in a lot of ways connected into understanding what the bad guys are doing. And then they come to you and they, you know, they're going to simulate that kind of attack. And so you can see, okay, well, if a bad guy really wanted to get access to me, where would my biggest exposures be? You know, there's always going to be things that somebody forgets, or, you know, somebody, you know, some server goes unpatched, or somebody's going to click an email. What does this look like in a scenario where we're actually dealing with, you know, a simulated bad guy coming in? And, you know, the reports and what you get can be very enlightening as to where your issues are, and it can help direct that spend later on and how you're going to fix things.
You know, guys, this isn't, you know, CSI Miami where the guys, you know, running at the keyboard and you can get yeah, we're in. It's not really that. What would you say the lowest hanging fruit on, you know, penetration testing would be that, like, if you had a tool arsenal of tools, what would be the tool that you're constantly going to?
Well, honestly, I mean, the easiest one always is that human factor, especially if you're not dealing with a situation with multi-factor authentication. I mean, if I can send out an email, get a password, log in, and then I'm already cooking. Like it's already on, and you're already in trouble. You already have some amount of data exposure because everybody in your company usually is going to have access to some form of data.
Yeah.
And that's really where it begins. The other big area out on the technology side is that there will be systems that people, you know, don't know about, things that they've decommissioned and they've left on the network and forgotten all about. You know, things that aren't being updated. They're not getting the latest security patches. They're not being maintained and doing these kind of things. I mean, you know, I could tell plenty of stories. I started out, this is what I did when I started out in the cybersecurity industry. And, you know, I had scenarios, you know, go into a bank and, you know, would be doing that. And there was an old domain controller that somebody had left on the network that was decommissioned, that hadn't been patched in 5 years, and just took it over, instantly had the domain admin owned everything. So it really is, that's kind of the second one. And that's where really the vulnerability scans that they're also talking about, which is a little different. That's more of a scanning tool that you have that just scans your network and says, here are all the weaknesses that we see, or something that isn't patched or something that isn't up to date. It just scans through the network and it looks at that and gives you a report. And, you know, it is important to note that as you're vetting out a vendor or something to do this, make sure to ask them what their penetration test methodology is, because if they just come in and run a scan, you're not getting what you pay for.
Yeah, that makes sense. So going, you know, that's a good segue into my next question is cybersecurity awareness training, right? It's you know, you're sending out an annual training, weekly micro trainings, doing white hat phishing campaigns, sending somebody, you know, Bob in accounting an email saying, hey, your USPS package is tracked here. And then they suddenly have to log into 365 and they have their password, and then they get retrained. You know, how can you highlight a little bit the importance of cybersecurity awareness training?
Well, you know, anytime you can stop that click from happening, that's golden. I mean, because if you can do that, and generally, if somebody, if one person catches it, be vocal. If you see something that's, hey, this is bad, you know, did you get this? You know, being vocal and everything can really help with that. But it's generally about teaching people, here are the tricks that the bad guys use that they might try to fool you with. Here's how to trust but verify, like you said. Here's how to do that. And most importantly, it's about that if you think you made a mistake, you're not going to get in trouble. Just tell somebody right away, and let's fix the problem together, because it really can happen to anybody. I've seen security awareness programs go sideways because people want to be, they want to be all mean and they want to crack the whip and they want to, that doesn't help anything. You want people to say, hey, I made a mistake, come help, like right away. And it really is about training people, that it's about just teaching them about the industry and understanding, where things are. And the one tip, if, for anyone who's watching or listening, the tip that I always bring across to you is that if it seems fishy, it probably is. So if there's something about your gut or something seems weird about it, like, why is the CFO asking me for a bunch of gift cards today? Like, I mean, if it seems strange, it probably is. And the amount of time that it would take for you to verify with the person really quickly to say, hey, is this really what's going on? Or even just turning to the person who sits in the desk next to you, or in these days, sending them an IM and saying, hey, does it make sense for them to want me to send them? And by the time you get finished typing it out or saying it out loud, you'll say, wait, no, that's terrible. That can't be real. So that's the biggest tip that I would leave people with if they're listening, to just to protect themselves in their own lives.
Yeah, and don't make it, like you were saying, that's such a great point. If you're a temperamental dealer, or you got a temperament or whatever, like you gotta like, if you're a little volatile, those things actively work against people reporting things for you, because they're more afraid of the consequences of what that looks like, rather than reporting and making the organization safer. So that's a really good point that you brought up. So periodically assess service providers is kind of our last point, and we'll move on. You want to make sure that the chain is only as strong as its weakest link, right? So you want to make sure that any vendor that you're engaging with, any startup, or there's really cool progressive products in the automotive space. They're constantly changing, but you have to make sure that those guys are complying to some minimum security, right? It's that they themselves are dealing with some stuff, because now the dealers are responsible for the access that they give. And that's where that change management kind of hooks back into that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it really, in my mind, as you're classifying your vendors, there's two buckets you want to put them in. There's the ones that are critical to your operations and or have access to your data. They go in bucket A, and then the rest of them go into bucket B. And the ones in bucket A in particular, those are the ones you want to spend a little extra time with and make sure, what are they doing to protect your information, your customers' information that they're handling? Are they following these same guidelines? Because at the end of the day, we're responsible for these guidelines. So now you're responsible for these guidelines. And, I would start communicating with them now, asking them questions. I mean, you're supposed to have a year to get compliant. Start asking them now, see if they're already there. Some of them are just going to say, oh, yep, we're here, and here's our SOC 2 report, and everything's fine. And then that's one less thing for you to worry about. The ones who aren't, then it gives them some time to get things in progress and make sure to follow up on them. If see, have they engaged somebody? Are they working with somebody? Are they doing this? Because the dirty little secret, you were talking about, people coming up with cool products that are, rapidly developing. The dirty little secret is, a lot of times developers think, how do I make it work first before how I can make it secure? And you're in a far better situation if you're working with somebody that, is thinking about security from the very start.
Absolutely. All right. So moving on a little bit. So I'm going to go kind of deep dive overview of everything. It's going to look like, we'll do kind of a rapid summary of everything. So have first an information security program. This is a big piece of getting to that, mile 26 of that marathon incident response plan. Make sure it's documented. You have it in a binder. You're repeating it. You're looking at it at least twice a year. Periodic risk assessment. You want to make sure that somebody comes in, like a cybersecurity partners or a consultant. There's, the big acronym accounting firms do these types of assessments. So you want to make sure that you're partnering with companies like those. You want to make sure that all your data is encrypted. Office 365 comes with natively G Suite, that your backups are encrypted with Datto, that your network is encrypted. You're requiring multi-factor authentication on all systems that access PII. Number one being your email, DMS, CRM, VPNs that people are going into your system. You want to make sure that everything has multi-factor authentication, that you have a data retention policy, that you're adopting procedures for change management. You're just not letting any, Joe Schmo connect into your system and start pulling data, because you are now responsible for that. Have a qualified individual, guys that have acronyms behind their names: CISSP, CISA, CISM, CompTIA, Security Plus is some of those. Monitor and log, that's a security operations center with guys that are looking eyeballs on glass, looking at data that's happening all over the world and identifying abnormalities in that data. This is what a cybersecurity operations center looks like. This is the glass that they're looking at: system compromise, exploit installations, delivery and attack. It's all, kind of in the weeds, nerd stuff, which I'm super happy about it. I like it. But also have annual penetration tests, cybersecurity team, red teams. This sometimes you hear this as red teams going in, like the mustache and the pizza boxes, trying to get into your server room. Also sending phishing emails. Trust but verify is the big piece of this. Cybersecurity awareness test, that's annual, micro trainings and white hat phishing campaigns, and then assessing your vendors from a cybersecurity standpoint, making sure that they have a checklist and that you're reviewing their cybersecurity program. So on to the Q&A portion. Questions. Here's my information. If you guys want to, Stefan and I can jump on a call with anybody that wants to deep dive into this, and we can have a question, or if they have, big, they have big concerns, we want to speak about that privately, we can jump in and have those conversations on the side. And also, if you scan this QR code, and I promise it's not a trick, if you scan this QR code, it will get to a place where you can just fill out a form and say, hey, I'd like to know more information about this. I promise I won't sell you anything. It's just going to be informational. Our goal is to make sure that everybody's on solid footing for December to be hopefully mile 20, 22, so they can do the couple administrative tasks and get to that mile 26. But Garrett, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, right now it looks like we have David has his hand up here. David, if you can unmute yourself, go ahead and ask what you have. Show's still muted if you're trying to say something.
David Roadwall. David, are you there?
Oh, his hand's down now. So maybe,
hands down. Well, maybe that was a
question.
Yeah, maybe a fat finger.
Did have someone drop something into the Q&A here, and let me see. Let me pull this up. Yeah, we had someone ask about. So we've mentioned the risk assessment several times here, Stefan. How long does it take for you to complete something like this?
So, a risk assessment process, it really depends a lot on how well documented everything is to begin with. So if things are very well documented and you've have things in order, it can be really quick. But overall, even if you haven't, it doesn't have to be that painful. I mean, we've got folks who do this all the time. And so it's just a matter of going through, interviewing, understanding your environment. It depends also on the size of the organization, but for a smaller organization, I mean, you're really looking at like a week or two to get through it. Larger, it might be, 3-4 weeks, something like that, but it doesn't have to be too cumbersome of a process to get through. And when I'm talking about that, I mean like from start to finish of the engagement. So that's not, I don't expect, 80 hours of your time to get things done or anything like that. But, just being able to go from start to finish, that's gonna get you fairly well. I see, average size dealership, about 100 employees. I'd say 2-3 weeks, at most. That would be usually what I would be seeing for something of that size.
I think Brian Coda's got a good question if we want to jump on this one. I'll answer this one. I like this question. So it's the question is there a hard line drawn in the sand that defines when the relationship with the customer ends? I would say, first and all, when the customer asks you to remove their information, right? That's the CCPA defines that very clearly. You have to give receipts that you've removed their customer information from all of your CRM systems, from your DMS, from any follow-on marketing environment. So yes, there is a hard line drawn. That's when the customer asks you to end that relationship. But also, you want to make sure that you're complying with state regulation, because sometimes you have to keep ROs for 7 years. You have to keep certain information for long periods of time. And if you're actively marketing to that customer, make sure that you have the safeguards in place that are protecting their data. That's it. That's really what we're talking about. It's like, if you're choosing to assume that risk, just safeguard it, right? And I think that's a fair assumption or a fair kind of handoff to say, he's like, you're agreeing that I'm going to market to you and you haven't asked me to stop, right? I'm going to protect that data for you. And that's kind of where this whole thing is coming from. I would say, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Do we got any other questions? That's a great question, Brian.
Let's see over here. We had one more question that was dropped in here. And that question was, we keep hearing about the risk of cyber attacks with the situation in Ukraine. Is that something in particular we should be worried about?
You know, I would say not right now, not yet. Obviously, you know, bad guy cyber activity is something that is going on all over the world at all times. I mean, even like right now, you know, there was some stories of NVIDIA and some of the other software and hardware manufacturers getting hacked. Well, guess what? It was a group from South America that did those ones. So, I mean, there are risks all over the world that things are doing that. I do, you know some people who are, you know, over kind of involved in the situation in Ukraine as far as from cyber attacks and everything. And most of the attributable stuff that they know that Russia's doing has been targeted right at Ukraine or at, you know, the border services of, you know, Romania or Poland next door. So, you know, they haven't really pushed things out there, but, you know, as the sanctions wrap up, there's no guarantee. They could start trying to do something, but my advice to that is to don't spend your time worrying about Russia. Spend your time worried about just protecting yourself, and you're going to be in a good position overall.
And guys, keep in mind the profile of the average hacker is somebody super technical that's really bored, that could make, you know, $20,000 in an afternoon by, you know, hacking into a system rather than, you know, going through the grind of, you know, living life in Romania or, you know, Ukraine or whatever, or in Russia, right? It's like they're highly technical guys that are sitting around that can start coming up with schemes, and it's usually social engineering. Like, you know, if somebody gets 6 gift cards at $500 a pop, they made their month, you know?
Right. Well, and on top of that, you got to understand, like, Russian organized crime really is tied into that, and they brought these people together. So I always tell people to, you know, forget about the kid in the black hoodie and start thinking about Tony Soprano, because that's the guy who really is on the other end of this.
And this market has become so mature that in the dark web, there's companies like ours, right? They're called MSPs for hackers. So they sell products and they say, hey, you know, phishing as a service, you subscribe with, you know, X amount of dollars a month and you get to send out so many phishing emails and so many, like, it's very mature. So this isn't going to go away, guys. This is only going to get more complex. And it's relatively straightforward to shore some of these things up with multi-factor authentication, with having consultants that are readily available for your industry, and not putting your head in the sand and not thinking that it's going to happen, that it's not going to happen to you. That's the dangerous mentality in this thing. And we can really shore it up with a couple, you know, with a couple actions that are relatively straightforward.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, guys. So I think, Gary, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we had one last question, and it's, what's the cost of the service or consultation?
So I'll jump on this. I'll talk to anybody ask any questions for free, right? So reach out, call us, have a conversation. We'll assess where you're at, and we're going to talk about appropriateness, right? Is that if we want to do a deep dive into your organization, we'll scope that out, really have the larger conversation, but don't feel afraid, embarrassed, or in any capacity to call us directly and have a question, and we'll answer those things. And then, you know, if we deem it necessary that your risk is to a level and you're not protected, we'll sit down and have a proper conversation about it. But that's why our information is in there, is to really have that conversation. You know, I'm on Clubhouse. You know, I know Stefan is usually available. We're constantly having these conversations to make sure that the dealer body is safe, secure, and can continue to do business. You guys already have enough on your plate. We don't want to add another portion of risk to what you're doing.
Yeah, and anything you can put together, it can be right sized, and it could be the right thing depending on where you are. If you're at mile 1, different things are appropriate than if you're mile 19.
Yeah.
You know, just like you were talking about vulnerability scans and pen tests. I always tell people, if we're going to find a whole bunch of stuff with a vulnerability scan, why are we going to pay for a pen test? Let's just start with the basics. I would much rather you spend your money on fixing stuff than just paying for an expensive service you're not going to get value out of.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just, you know, kind of a heads up, guys, and kind of wrapping this up. You know, we're Stefan and I are going to be doing a podcast in the next couple weeks or the next month or so, and we're going to be talking about the part 2 of the FTC regulators mount up is kind of the theme of this, and we want to make sure that, you know, if we want to do a deep dive, and whoever's interested in this or whoever wants to talk to their dealer principal and give this information over, this is going to be recorded. You know, my email is in there. You know, contact information for Stefan also will be in here. We'll be sending this out to everybody that registers for the webinar, the recording of this and the slides. And we want to make sure that, you know, people are safe, secure, and can continue to do business. This is a business that I love dearly because it's a deeply American tradition to do this. We give people the second most important purchase of their life. And I'm very passionate about that. So, you know, feel free to download that music, or excuse me, that podcast, and we'll help everybody out with some more information. All right, guys, I think that's it, and we'll wrap it up and give everybody some time back, and appreciate everybody for coming, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.